Greetings and welcome back. It's your host, Gabe Morales. In part one, we ended with John Gotti's calculated plan to take out his boss, Paul Castellano, as well as Castellano's designated heir, Thomas Bellotti, at Sparks Steakhouse in downtown Manhattan in late 1985. Several days after the Castellano murder, Gotti was named to a three-man committee, along with Consigliere Joseph Ingallo and Gambino Capo Frank DeSico, to temporarily run the family pending the election of a new boss. As intended political cover, the panel announced that an internal investigation to Castellano's murder was underway. However, it was no secret that Gotti was acting boss in all but name, and nearly all of the family's capos knew that he had been the one behind the hit of Castellano. Gotti was formally acclaimed as new boss of the Gambino family at a meeting of approximately 20 capos held on January 15, 1986. Just a few weeks after Castellano's murder, Gotti immediately appointed Frank DeSico as his underboss and promoted Angelo Ruggiero and Sammy the Bull Gravano to the position of capos. By the way, I forgot to mention in the last video concerning Gotti's money-making crew that brother mobsters Caesar and Anthony Guarino were the main business minds and frontmen for Gotti's big money-making crew in Queens, New York. So while Gotti was known as a hothead, he also had some business sense too, and was smart enough to surround himself with both money earners as well as tough guys who would take you out in a heartbeat on his orders. Gotti became known as the Dapper Don in the press due to his high-profile slick looks of hand-tailored suits and silk ties, and his expensive shoes. He looked just like what many people thought a modern mob boss would look like. And, unlike his colleagues, Gotti made little effort to hide his mob connections, and in fact was very willing to provide sound bites to the media who ate it up. But mob leaders from other families were enraged at the Castellano murder. There were long-standing rules in place to ensure stability in mob leadership and to prevent wars within each family and against each other. The other bosses also disapproved of Gotti's high-profile style, which they thought brought unnecessary law enforcement attention to mafia activities. Gotti's biggest enemy was Genovese boss Vincent the Chin Gigante, who, as I stated in previous episodes, was a strong Castellano ally. Gigante soon conspired with Lucchese boss Anthony Tony Ducks Corallo to have Gotti whacked. Corallo gave the contract to two main members of his family, Vittorio Vic Amuso and Anthony Gaspipe Caso, as described in the Lucchese family episode. April 13th, 1986, Frank DeSico was killed when his car was bombed following a visit by Castellano loyalists. The bombing was coordinated by future Lucchese Crime Family boss Vic Amuso and future underboss Tony Caso. Following the bombing, Gotti's racketeering trial was rescheduled to avoid tainting the jury by the resulting publicity. And while the prosecutor had Gotti's bail revoked due to evidence of witness intimidation in another case, Gotti still ordered the murder of Robert DiBernardo by his capo and one of his main enforcers, Sammy the Bull Gravano. Both DiBernardo and Ruggiero had been vying to succeed DeSico until Ruggiero accused DiBernardo of challenging Gotti's leadership. When Ruggiero, also under indictment, had his bail revoked, a frustrated John Gotti promoted old Joe Piney Armone as his underboss. Jury selection for the racketeering case began in August of 1986, with Gotti finally standing trial. But the Gambinos were able to compromise the case when an individual named George Pape withheld his friendship with juror number 11. Through this individual, Pape contacted Gravano and agreed to sell his vote on the jury for $60,000. At the trial's opening statements on September 25th, Gotti's defense attorney, famed mob lawyer Bruce Cutler, denied the existence of any Gambino family and framed the government's entire case as being just a personal vendetta. Main defense strategy was attacking the credibility of witnesses by discussing their crimes before they turned informant. For instance, during this trial, Cutler called bank robber Matthew Tainer, a would-be prosecution witness who was dropped for unreliability, that had testified that he was offered drugs and sexual favors for his testimony. Trainer's allegations would be dismissed by the judge as wholly unbelievable after the trial, and he was subsequently convicted of perjury. Despite Cutler's defense and critiques about the prosecution's performance, many believed that many on the jury were in favor of convicting Gotti. However, Gotti knew that from the very beginning of the trial that he could do no worse than a hung jury. And on March 13, 1987, they acquitted Gotti and his co-defendants of all charges. In the face of this, federal authorities had recently showcased several major cases against the mob, but in this case had to admit defeat. And this acquittal further added to Gotti's reputation, and he was then often called the Teflon Don by the press, in reference to any charges being able to stick. He was also emboldened by his parent getting away with the Castellano, Bellotti, and several other murders directed by him against his enemies, and everyone was fearful that they would be next. December 11, 1990, FBI agents and NYPD detectives raided the Ravenite Social Club, arresting Gotti, Gravano, and consigliere Frank Lucasio. Gravano soon pleaded guilty to racketeering charges. Gotti was faced with 5 murders: the Castellano, Bellotti, and Di Bernardo hits, as well as Liborio Milito and Louis De Bono murders, as well as conspiracy to murder, loan sharking, illegal gambling, obstruction of justice, bribery, and tax evasion. Based on tapes from FBI bugs planted at mob locations and by informants, Gambino leadership was denied bail by the courts. At the same time, attorneys Bruce Cutler and Gerald Chargell were disqualified from defending Gotti and Gravano after prosecutors successfully argued that they were part of the evidence, thus very likely to be called as witnesses. Prosecutors not only argued that Cutler and Chargell knew about potential criminal activity, but actually had worked as in-house counsel for the Gambino family, in particular John Gotti, who then hired attorney Albert Krager, who had previously defended former boss Joseph Bonanno. As discovery evidence in the case went along, the tapes created a rift between Gotti and Gravano, as it showed that Gambino boss describing his newly appointed underboss as being too greedy, and attempted to frame Gravano as the main force behind all of the murders. After the tapes came out revealing his disparaging remarks, Gotti's attempt at reconciliation failed, leaving a disillusioned Gravano very doubtful of his chances of winning his case. And he ultimately opted to turn informant, agreeing to testify on November 13th, 1991. At the time, he was the highest-ranking member of a New York crime family to turn informant. Gotti and Lucasio were tried in U.S. District Court for Eastern New York, and jury selection began in January 1992 with an anonymous jury under high security. Now considered to be a hostile witness, Gotti called Gravano a stone junkie, while his attorneys sought to discuss his past steroid use and erratic behavior. After presenting additional testimony and tapes, the government rested its case on March 24th. June 23, 1992, Gotti and Lucasio were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Gotti surrendered to federal authorities to serve his prison term in December of that year. And some people believe the heyday of the New York Five Families died with his imprisonment.
It was The Godfather without the fancy music, but with a great storyline. The camera angles weren't very flattering, and the sound quality wasn't great, but the jury thought the content nailed John Gotti and his co-defendant Frank Lucasio. The cast of onlookers was first-rate, as Gotti bragged to court officers about his pulling power after being chided by guards for just attracting boxer Ronaldo Snipes to the gallery.
I think that the greatest drama is being played in this courtroom today. But if a friendship isn't worth anything, I mean, our whole system of life is in question here.
Quinn is talking about one-time Gotti friend Sam Gravano, who sang his heart out about 19 murders. Some of them, he said, ordered by Gotti. Through the testimony, Gotti smirked and stared down Gravano. At one point, the judge warned Gotti he'd move the case out of New York. Unanswered, why Gotti talked so freely at the Ravenite Social Club in an apartment above it about the Cosa Nostra and whacking people. Also baffling, why Gotti chose as underboss Sammy Bull Gravano, who later turned on him. Gravano on the stand remaining unshaken as he described how Gotti ordered the killing of Gambino boss Paul Castellano. Even in its dull moments, the trial was dramatic. The case interrupted by bomb scares. In Brooklyn, an attempted hit on the sister of another possible witness. A defense attorney cited for contempt. A woman bursting into the court shouting, "Gravano killed her sons." Gotti criticizing the prosecution's hairdos, muttering comments, the judge warning Gotti he'd be removed from the courtroom to watch the proceedings on TV. Gotti defiant to the last. And U.S. Attorney Andrew Maloney almost blowing the case in his summation, indicating the jury should be frightened to convict Gotti.
On September 26, 1994, a federal judge sentenced Gravano to 5 years in prison. However, he had already served 4 years while fighting his case, so the sentence amounted to less than 1 year. Gravano was soon placed in the WITSEC, Witness Protection Program, but was busted in Arizona for drug dealing and sent back to prison. After doing time on that case, he was released again and currently has his own YouTube channel where he discusses past mob business. Meanwhile, Gotti continued to rule the family from prison, while day-to-day operations of the family shifted to capos John Jackie Nose D'Amico and Nicholas Little Nicky Carrazzo. The latter was due to take over as acting boss, but himself was sentenced to 8 years in prison on racketeering charges. It was at that time that Gotti's son, John Jr. Gotti, took over as head of the family, but he too was prosecuted for racketeering in 1999 and was sentenced to 77 months. I should state here that while in prison, John Gotti was assaulted by a Washington, D.C. black. As shown in some of my Aryan Brotherhood videos, he allegedly hired the brand to get revenge. But the Aryan Brotherhood started demanding protection money, and when the payment stopped, they stopped looking out for him. The ABs had been engaged in a long and bloody war with the DC blacks and really didn't want another major case added to their RICO charges. And besides, the culprit had already been whisked away by authorities for his own protection. John's brother, Peter Gotti, took over the family sometime in 2001, shortly before John died in prison on June 10th. 2002. With Peter Gotti in charge, the family's fortunes dwindled quite a bit from the days when they were considered to be the most powerful criminal organization in America under Carlo Gambino. Peter Gotti was also in prison in 2003, and leadership allegedly went to a panel of Nicholas Carrazzo, Jackie D'Amico, and Joseph Carrazzo. But Peter Gotti remained the official boss, even while in prison. Gotti's rivals eventually regained control of the family, and Mikey, aka Mikey Scars DiLeonardo, the former head of the family's white-collar operations and one of Gotti's last supporters, turned state's evidence and testified against mobsters from all of New York's 5 families, including Gambino boss Peter Gotti and Anthony Sonny Ciccone. Leonardo then disappeared into the Witness Protection Program. In 2005, Nicholas Lil Nicky Carrazzo and his longtime supporter, Leonard Lenny Di Maria, were released from prison after serving 10 years for racketeering. At that time, the U.S. law enforcement recognized Carrazzo as being boss of the Gambinos, with his brother Joseph being recognized as the consigliere and Arnold Z. Gutierrez as acting underboss. Jackie D'Amico was also highly regarded. In February 2008, a federal grand jury indictment led to the arrest of 54 Gambino family members and associates under Operation Old Bridge. This case showed a growing alliance between the Gambinos and the Sicilian Mafia, which wanted to get further into the drug trade. One of those arrested in the raids was Frank Cali, a future boss of the Gambino family, who was allegedly an ambassador between the American and Italian branch of the family. Most arrested in those cases ended up pleading guilty. 2008, a 3-man panel consisting of Daniel Danny Marino, John Gambino, and Bartolomeo Venace took control of the Gambino family, while other leaders were in prison. In July 2011, it was reported that Domenico Dom Cefecu had been promoted to acting boss. During Cefecu's reign, the Sicilian faction, that are known as Zips, gained further control of the Gambino crime family in New York City, and many feel that Sicilians in reality ran the Gambinos for almost 2 decades after Gotti's incarceration, and note that they still have influence today. At the time, it was believed that the family had between 150 to 200 main members, as well as over 1,000 associates, making it one of the biggest crime families in America. The Gambinos continued to control some labor unions and was very active in many parts of New York City. There were major cases against the Gambinos and other New York crime families in 2009, 2014, and 2017, and many more mafiosos were locked up. Leadership continued to change hands several times during that time, and on March 13th, 2019, alleged Gambino boss Frank Kelly was shot dead outside of his home on Staten Island by a lone gunman. This was believed to be personal and not mob-related. Following Callie's death, it was reported that Lorenzo Menino was the new Gambino leader, with Dom Chelafu being his underboss, and Big Louis Hilario as consigliere. Thomas Gambino, son of infamous mafia boss Carlo Gambino, was also considered to be a major player in the crime family. In November 2023, 16 Gambino family members and associates were indicted on racketeering, as well as 17 more in June of 2024. Apparently, the Gambino crime family is still involved in a variety of rackets, but they and the other 5 families are a shell of their former selves from their heyday in the 1920s through 70s, but they haven't totally gone away, as some people believe.
I'm going to bust this sure. That's number one. And number two, whatever he's got in jury, I'm taking it. You understand?
Informants and recordings show the crime families continue to muscle in and make money, from fraud to union ripoffs to no-show jobs.
There's going to be a guy that's going to be needed there to count the trucks, sit in a trailer, do nothing, and I think it's perfect for you.
Arrests making some difference.
That's a disruption of their activities, but it's certainly not a dismantlement of the overall family.
The 5 families somewhat weaker, but law enforcement officials describe their organized crime strategies as kind of like mowing a lawn. You have to keep at it. And last night's hit now bringing a bright light on the Gambino crime family that of late had been operating in the shadows.
Because a lot of us have been saying we hadn't heard much about this here lately, and you were here in 1985 when Castellano went down.
Yes, it was a brazen hit. That was much more public than this one right outside that restaurant, Spark Steakhouse, and his body was right there on the sidewalk by a car.
As of last year, in 2024, Lenny DiMaria was reported to be the new underboss of the Gambino family. Ralph Davino passed since this picture was taken. Currently, Lorenzo Menino is considered to be the number one by many, but has been at odds with little Nicky Carrazzo, who is a bitter rival of John Gotti ever since the time he became boss. You see, evidently, Gotti declined to promote Carrazzo to capo when he took control, which was seen as an act of disrespect by Carrazzo that he never forgot. However, since he was such a good earner for the family, Gotti did not want to get rid of him. After Gotti's imprisonment in the mid-1990s, Carrazzo was elevated to serve on the ruling panel, but as I mentioned, was sentenced to prison in 2009 and was released in 2019, at which time many state he fought for control of what was left of the Gambinos family, as he felt he should be the rightful boss. I hope you enjoyed this series on La Cosa Nostra's 5 families. I'd like to thank all of the Facebook groups and La Cosa Nostra experts who helped me put this series together, as well as Scott Bernstein of Original Gangsters Podcast, and I'd like to give a special thanks to John Livia of Serious and Silliness Outcasts for his assistance. I'm going to take a little break, but we'll return soon with more fire content. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.